Good morning, ladies and gents. You join Mr. Businessman on this last live stream of the week. Suffering badly for hay fever today. I've actually changed the topic that we were doing today. We were going to jump into the economic side of stuff today, and we are going to do some supply and demand. But I'm just not up to it. I feel. I feel. Do you have you ever suffered with hay fever? It's not a nice thing. It's just I've taken my tablet. It'll probably start kicking in, but you can see it makes me look rough. That doesn't help when I do nothing with my hair as well, doesn't it? But these days of lockdown, we're not too worried about the way we look. Are we? It'll be a worry the way I look when I use these again and again later on in life. That'll be a problem on it. But yeah, bloody hair fever. It's annoying, isn't it? So we're going to do source to finance anyway. We're not going to let it stop us. We're not going to let these trying times slow us down. So yeah, we're going to get straight into it today and get on with some source of finance. The one thing I do want to tell you about today's stream though is it's very much a lot of small bits of information. So if you get stuck, what I would suggest you do is just pause the stream, have a look at the PowerPoint slide, and we'll go from there. The pollen count must be crazy high today, so excuse me if I'm coughing and spluttering and stuff like that. I've not got coronavirus. I don't think it's purely hay fever. My eyes are burning. So yeah, let's do some of that. All right. Here we go. Oh, there we go. That's better, isn't it? So yeah, source to finance. Again, as I said, it's not a particularly difficult bit of the spec, but it is something that's really, really important. Understanding where businesses get finance from. If you get stuck on any of the bits, just stop on the PowerPoint slide and have a little look at it because it's very much. Just lots and lots of information today, lots and lots of bits of information. So we're going to have a look at, explain the sources of finance available to entrepreneurs and SMEs. If you remember SMEs, what are SMEs? They're small to medium-sized enterprises, aren't they? Most of the UK's economy is built up of SMEs. Analyse the advantages and disadvantages of each source of finance. We'll have a look at those. Evaluate the different sources of finance available to entrepreneurs. The one thing that we won't be able to do loads of is the evaluation thing today. Is actually evaluating the usefulness. But I do want you to be thinking about that. I want you to be thinking about all the time when and where it would be more or less applicable to a situation. Okay, because remember that's going to be the difference between a good business student and a bad business student. The ability to actually talk through it, isn't it, and actually be able to write that down. So yeah, mortgages might be great, higher purchase might be great, trade credit might be brilliant, but in what circumstance would it be good? That's the main point, isn't it? And what businesses might be able to utilise that effectively. That's it, isn't it? So explain the source of finance available to establish large businesses in appropriate distance situations. Understand the source of finance can be internal or external. Explain the internal source of finance. Explain external source of finance. Advantages and disadvantages. And the impact of different types of finance. The main thing that we're going to be talking about is the expense to the businesses, aren't we, to do this? So just keep that in mind when we're talking through them. I might not be able to tell you absolutely everything because we'd be here all week, but yeah, I'll give you a flavour for it, and then if you can spend a bit of time thinking about the sort of your own examples and things like that, that would be wonderful. Okay, so let's get on. So first things first, you'll have these in your book if you've got the book, but it's basically just a load of definitions for stuff. So I'll show you the answers anyway. So if you want to stop it now and have a go at them, I know that I'm chopping off a little bit of it. Let's see if I can just move that up for you. There you go. So if you haven't got the book, feel free to have a look at those and have a go. Pause the stream. I'll show you. If you have got the book, feel free to have another look over them. But see if you can figure them out. All right. That's what I was looking for. But as I said, you'll probably know these in a moment when we actually get into them. Okay. So when an entrepreneur is setting up a business, they are likely to need finance from somewhere to help. It's very unlikely that you are going to start a business with absolutely no finance. I can't think of any examples of a business where you would not need any help financially at all, because even if you were able to run a business through skill, in terms of you were selling skills and therefore you wouldn't need much of actual finance, you would still need the ability to pay yourself a wage. You would still need to be able to pay for a sandwich at lunchtime. You'd still need to be able to pay for your clothes to be able to go to work in and things like that. So there aren't any businesses that are completely without any costs. So it's important to remember that, isn't it? So what we need to do is we need to ask a couple of things to help us figure out what kind of finance we need, what level of finance we need, and where the most effective way to get that finance from is. It's usually about trying to get it for the cheapest price we can. To get them, not necessarily the most money for the cheapest price, but essentially we need to get the appropriate amount of money for the cheapest price we can. Because remember, it is expensive to borrow money a lot of the time. You can get good deals from banks and things a lot of the time, but they are themselves businesses, aren't they? A lot of banks are PLCs, so they have shareholders and things like that. Very, very expensive, and you can buy shares in them yourselves and things like that. So not bad investments a lot of the time, banks. But judging by the behaviour over the last couple of years and since 2008 global financial collapse and things like that, it's not been a particularly investment that you would be massively let's invest in banks. Think about an entrepreneur or a new business in comparison to a large established business. How might the answers differ for them? So let's have a look at the answers. It says, how much funding is needed? So are we looking for something which we're going to have to buy really capital intensive stuff? Are we going for, buying loads of machinery, absolutely kitting somewhere out, getting a massive warehouse? Are we talking about, buying loads of computers? Or are we talking about buying, one MacBook for your office so that you can do everything from here? I mean, for me, it wouldn't have been that expensive to actually set this up. I mean, it would be decently expensive. As I said, my MacBook I got this for like 800 quid, even though it was this last year's model, sort of 2019 model. So it was the most current model. But I just got it on eBay and it was like brand new. So, but that should have been like 1,300 quid. I've got like an ultra wide monitor here, which has all my stuff on it. I think that was about 300 quid, something like that. I've got a Blue Yeti mic here that I got off someone off Facebook for like 60 quid, but that should have been 120. I've got a table. Can you see? It starts adding up, but even that. But I've got an environment. I pay a mortgage on this house, so I don't have to worry about my studio. Essentially, my studio is my back room, isn't it? That I'm have the ability to use for things. But if you think about it from my perspective, it's not actually that expensive because I had the gear anyway. It's quite cheap for me to do this. Just a little bit of endorsement here. And but for a lot of businesses, be extremely expensive, wouldn't it? It's more we're not really a very capital intensive thing. It's more labor intensive, this, isn't it? Me spending my time with you than anything else. So the amount of time that the money is required for, a really important one. Is it something that we're going to have to require for years and years and years, in which case a bank loan might be more appropriate? Excuse me. Or is it something that we're going to be able to pay back very quickly, in which case there might be a large amount of lenders that are open to us. What will the finance be used for? Now, this is to try and get... it's for you yourself, but it's usually to try and to convince the lenders why they should sell to you, or rather, sell the money to you, why they should give you the loan. Because if you only need it for 5 minutes, if you only need it for a couple of weeks, it's going to be much easier to convince someone to give you the money. But if it's something that you're going to have for a long period of time, you're going to have a decent amount of security, whether it's a property or something like that, to be able to put down. The affordability of repayments, this is something that's just changed since 2008, since we had the global financial collapse. There's been a hell of a lot more legislation that the banks have to abide by now, and that includes stuff like you have to watch videos when you're applying for things, and they've got to make sure they've got to go through necessary checks to make sure things are affordable to you, which is reasonable, and they should have been doing it anyway. But it is annoying when you go for things like I went to change my current account. I changed my current account to add my wife onto it. And that took ages. I must have been in the bank for about an hour messing around with it. And you just think, oh, and that used to be, it's basically just to make sure that the banks can't just do whatever they want, because that was one of the reasons why the global financial collapse. Anyway, I should do a video on the global financial collapse, shouldn't I? And just talk through it and what the hell happened. Because I know we've talked about it in class, but it'd be a nice one, wouldn't it? Just the, crazy things that have happened in business. Whether or not personal or business assets are available as security as well. Remember, are you a PLC, an LTD? It's going to make a difference, isn't it? But remember, even if we've got limited liability, so remember, if we are a separate legal entity, if we put our own personal assets up, even if we are an LTD, so if we've got that limited liability, if you then say, well, actually, I've got a house I can put up as security, then that gets rid of your limited liability. So even if you are a separate legal entity, if you use your own personal assets as security for the loan, which a lot of businesses do, then it completely gets rid of any benefits of having limited liability anywhere. So keep that in mind if you've decided to go down that route. The next one as well, we've got to think about internal or external. A lot of people think that you have to get money from external sources. You don't, not necessarily. A big one that you can get is retained profit, so profit from the previous year. Really, really nice one to use. No interest. You might naff off shareholders, but a lot of the time they're all right about it because you're using the money effectively. You don't want to turn into someone like Apple that got sued by their own shareholders because they spent because they had billions and billions in the bank, and they were saying that they were holding the money on the off chance they wanted to buy a company, which is probably reasonable for Apple actually because of such a massive company. But the shareholders were saying, "Well, get stuffed. I want my money. At the end of the day, I invest in the business. You're doing really well, and I don't want you just holding onto all this this money on the off chance that you want to do something." So you don't want to get into that thing. But that's a really nice way of doing it. We've got the owner's capital. If it's privately owned or something like that, then you'd be able to access the money from the individual. Ask the owners or investors if they wanted to do it. Working capital, so your working capital, if you remember, your working capital is the money that you have day to day to be able to pay bills and things like that. So if it's a small bill, you might just be able to pay it out of that. It's like your petty cash essentially, the money that we've got to pay bills, that we've got day to day bills and things like that. Or sale of assets. Thing to remember about sale of assets is, though, it can sometimes, businesses do it a lot of the time at the end of the financial year to make their books look better. So if we know that certain types of businesses, PLCs and the like, have a legal obligation to publish accounts, and they know that their stakeholders are going to see those accounts, so they need to make sure that they look as good as they physically can. So what they do sometimes is they sell assets, or if they move stuff about to make it look better, make the financial situation of the business look better than it actually is. And in real terms, it's not actually any better or worse, is it? But the problem with doing things like that, it's called window dressing, and the problem, although it's not illegal, the problem with doing it is the fact that if you need to do that, then perhaps it's demonstrating an issue with the way that you're running the business. If you're having to move stuff about, why don't you just, are you not doing as well as you should? Maybe it's a mismanagement, something like that. So maybe it's drawing your attention to something else you should be focusing on as a business, rather than just moving stuff about and making it look good on paper. Or maybe it's showing that you're about to fail and the business isn't doing well. Now, I've got a load of external ones as well. We're going to go through these in detail, okay? So, just before we get into the different types of them, we've got capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is spending on items which may be used over and over again. So it's like we talk about capital intensive stuff. It's when you invest in things which are non-consumable, essentially. So laptops, things like that, things which are again and again and again. Things which we're likely to have for more than a year. They're called fixed assets, aren't they? So for more than a year. And revenue expenditure is expenditure that refers to payments for goods and services that are used in the generation of revenue. So day-to-day expenditure, electricity, gas, whatever it is, raw materials, that kind of stuff. So it's this hair fever, as I said, makes me look really gaunt as well, doesn't it? But I make it look good. I realised as well that I forgot to put Mr. Businessman's Midweek Madness up, so I'm going to call it End of Week Insanity this week and put up 2 videos just to prove a point. You know what? It's insane. So, again, just to put them on a little diagram for you here, short to medium term, that kind of stuff. I know that it's not particularly the easiest thing to see, but can you see that one? So, we've got short to medium term, we've got long term. Have a look at these. Feel free to pause the stream and have a good look at those. But it's basically breaking it down into long and medium term things. But I just want to get into individual ones. So let's get into them. It's going to take us a little while, but we'll talk through these. Okay, it won't take us any longer than a normal lesson, but I'll try and do them at speed. Okay, here we go. Number one. So owner's capital is an internal one, and if you remember, the capital is put into the business by its owner. They can only be used by sole traders or partnerships. Why is that? Because they are privately owned. If it was a PLC or an LTD, they are not owned by individuals, so they can't ask that. Essentially, that would be share capital, because you'd be asking your investors to buy more shares from you to be able to get money that way, wouldn't it? Now, why is it cheaper? Well, it's cheaper because they don't need to be repaired. The owner will get their money back eventually through drawings, we call it, or dividends. They will get their money back anyway, or they might just invest in it because it's their business and they want to do something with it. No repayments, so it reduces the cash outflows, which is really good. So it's nice for controlling your cash flow. We won't necessarily have to, it's a monthly payment now. I mean, it'll depend on what you you as the owner, what you'll do with it, though, because you might decide, well, actually, I want to be paid back by the business by a certain thing, but there's no obligation for you to do it. It's not like getting a bank loan where there's a legal obligation for you to actually pay it back. The amount could be raised is limited, so it probably needs to supplement with other sources. So, unless you've got someone who's an absolute, multi-millionaire coming in, but even they have an only a limited amount of resource. We're talking about Jeff Bezos, weren't we, the other day, of Amazon fame, who's the richest man in the world of 100 billion or whatever he's worth now, hundreds of billions. And even he has a limited resource. He only has 100 billion, which is crazy, isn't it? But he does only have that much. Risk of the owner losing these funds. Now, for these ones, we usually use them for startup capital, and it depends on how much the capital the owner actually has at the time, whether it will be useful or not. Okay, next one, retained profit, another internal one. Retained profit is the profit after tax, which is kept in the business for reinvestment. It's the cheapest source of finances. It does not need to be repaired and does not involve the third party. So why is this really good? Well, retained profit is just simply using the profit that we've done last year. We're going off old success, essentially, of why we want to invest in this and use our past success to be able to invest in the future of the business, which is good because there's no interest payments. We don't have any legal obligation to pay anything back because there's nothing to pay it back because we're using our own profit. Limited the amount of profit made and therefore may not cover large finance needs. It's true, it depends on the kind of business it is and how much profit you've made and the expectations from stakeholders in terms of shareholders, what dividends they're expecting and things like that. Massively has an opportunity cost. Whatever money that you're spending on this, whatever money that you use from your profit last time means that you can't use it on other things, can you? Which is an important thing to remember. Always has an opportunity cost, all of these. Can be used for anything, which is a really nice one. It's completely up to you what you use it for, and it depends on how much profit they made. It's basically the stakeholders and the profit levels that has a big impact on that one, doesn't it? Okay. Sale of assets. We talked about this basically already, haven't we? About why it's so... it can be different, it can be good. I mean, sale of assets is a useful thing, but remember that you can only sell them once. So I've had a couple of people who've come to me and said, yeah, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell all these things to be able to finance this new project I'm working on. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's fine, but once you've sold it, you go without the use of it. One thing that I always think with the sale of assets as well, and this is more of a personal thing in terms of if you're deciding to finance a new project or maybe to finance a purchase by selling your old stuff. I always think that you've got to weigh up whether the thing which you're selling is worth more to you than you could sort of sell it for. So you couldn't rebuy that thing. If you just want rid of it and it's no use to you, then that's totally fine. But let's say I wanted to sell an Xbox, right? And if I was to sell it now, you'd probably get like £80 to £100 for an Xbox One. It's not a lot of money at all. It's worth more to me to have an Xbox One to hand for 80 quid because you wouldn't be able to buy one for 80 quid. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes you've got to weigh it up like that of thinking, yeah, but okay, you need 80 quid now, but is it a purchase which is desperate? Is it something that she's thinking? Because once you've sold the asset, because it could be machinery, it could be vehicles, it could be, it could be a number of things, couldn't it? It could be things like raw materials and stuff like that, but we tend to think about them as bigger. You've got to be careful because there's that opportunity cost that you're not going to have access to them anymore. So there's no interest or repayment charges, no maintenance or repair bills once sold, which is good because you might have some things which are just out of date now. You might have some things that are just saying, right, well, actually, we're trying to get rid of this because it's not the newest one. People update their phones all the time, don't they? Because and they sell their old ones. Why? Because the phones are probably still okay, but they want the newest one on the thing to make it, because of social convention and things like that. New and improved assets can be purchased, like we said, like the phones. Once sold, the asset can no longer be used. Lower value of fixed assets on the balance sheet should only be used if the assets are no longer needed and depends on if we have unwanted assets to sell. Now, why do we mention lower value of fixed assets on the balance sheet? Well, you will be able to see when you actually publish a balance sheet. It shows how the assets are doing versus liabilities, and we are going to talk about ratios in terms of your sort of your working capital and things like that, and your how much liabilities you've got versus how many assets you've got. But it can be good or bad, but you've got to keep that in mind. It's never going to be good that you've got less assets on your balance sheet, because if you have less assets, that means you have, but in real terms, more liabilities. Not more, but it'll look like there's more. In terms of your ratios will go down because there'll be less thingy. So your ratio of assets to liabilities will change slightly, if that makes sense. Working capital. Okay, so working capital, finance available for the day-to-day expenses of a business. Businesses with a good liquidity should have enough working capital. So we call liquidity as access to liquid cash, access to cash that we actually can spend, not tied up in assets and things like that. So you've got to think, have you actually got money in the bank? If you've got actual money in the bank, then that's liquid asset. That's something that you can do something with. That's something that you can be happy with, because you can think, well, actually, if there was an opportunity now, then I would be able to jump on it. Now, so I always tell my students in this to try and get some liquidity, try and get a float in your bank account. You might struggle as a student at this point to do it, but try and get into the habit of it, because if you can get, say, £1,000 in your bank account, that you never go below, that £1,000 is zero to you. So if you ever need to spend more than £1,000, you only ever borrow off yourself, essentially. It's a really good technique to get into. And if opportunities present themselves, it's Black Friday, there's an opportunity, or something like that. You always hear about these people, oh yeah, well, I'm waiting for my payday, I don't have to do that. I don't wait for payday to buy things. I don't think I've ever had to wait to payday to buy things, because I always have my float, just in case. So it's a nice little thing. I know it's not easy, I know it's okay for me to say, but I'm just the same as you. I'm not like a millionaire or anything. Not yet, anyway. This Mr. Businessman thing's taking off so well that I'll be a multi-millionaire in no time. Jeff Bezos, watch yourself, because Mr. Businessman's coming for you. He says with his 3 viewers or whatever it is that we've got the stream. I know that people watch these afterwards. I'm no credence about doing this live. This is for me. I always say that. This is for me, not you. Tighter stock. So tighter trade credit may discourage sales. Excuse me. So why do we say that? Well, access to trade credit is really important, because remember, it's a lot to do with the psychology of the consumer, and the psychology of the person, whether we're able to purchase products or not. So if you give trade credit to people, whether you give it to them or they give it to you, means it's more accessible, the products, then to you, doesn't it? You can actually borrow money. You don't have to pay it back straight away. You can pay for it in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. They said, didn't they? We talked about it on the stream the other day, that these businesses are being unreasonable with it. I think they said it was it supermarkets being unreasonable with other places, because they were saying that they were demanding increases in payment terms that wasn't reasonable. The suppliers aren't not superhuman. They're not just got suddenly more money, suddenly more assets and things to deal with. So this is real life. This is happening right now. But tighter stock may mean unable to meet an increase in demand. Because remember, if we've got less working capital, if we're using working capital to do these things, then we're not going to be able to use it on trade credit. We won't be able to offer as much trade credit. We might not be able to buy as much stock. Unlikely to be significant amounts for larger expenditure. Like we said, it's hard to keep liquid asset. You're probably not going to have loads of working capital hanging about, just on the off chance you want to buy something. So probably not the best idea using working capital for that. But if it's a very, very short-term thing, then potentially you could use it. Okay, let's have a look at some external ones. So bank loans. You might have heard of bank loans. You might not have had one yet, but a sum of money that is borrowed from the bank that is repaid over a fixed term with interest. Now, the important thing to remember about these ones is there is a legal obligation that you pay this money back. And I say that because on some of these, like if you get sort of capital from investors and things like that, they're taking the risk. There will be a contract, but there won't be necessarily a legal obligation. They won't come after you necessarily. Obviously, you'd have to look at the situation, but for bank loans, there is a legal obligation that you pay this money back with the contract terms that you've agreed. So it's usually a fixed rate of interest, no set amount to be borrowed, making it more flexible. Now, the thing as well that students get confused with these bank loans is they get confused and think that the bank loan amount, like the amount that the person's paying back every month, changes. No, it's very much like your phone contract or something like that. You'll pay a certain amount every month, and they'll figure that interest rate out or whatever it is that you're going to do prior to you doing it. So they'll if you're paying £40 a month for your phone and your phone contract, then they don't suddenly go, oh, well, you've actually paid some off now, so you can pay £39, £38, £37. They don't do that, and that's very much similar to this one as well. They'll divvy up how much you want to buy, in terms of how much you want to borrow, by the amount of time you want to borrow it for, divvy it up, add the interest on, and then they'll give you an amount that you'll pay them back every month, and then at the end of the loan you settled and good to go. There's no set amounts and borrowed, making it more flexible, so you can potentially borrow a lot of money. It depends on what the bank is willing to lend you and what the circumstances of the business are. In the long term, it will pay back more than borrowed. It's really important to remember that, because you are going to, at the end of the day, it's not a huge amount of interest, but even so, if you are borrowing quite a lot of money, which you probably will be doing, even things from like 10 grand or something like that, you're still going to probably be spending, you're probably going to be paying back 13, 14 grand or something like that. It's a lot of money. So at the end of the day, it's 30-40% at the end of the day, isn't it? And that depends on how long you're borrowing it for and stuff like that. If you think about a mortgage and things like that, we'll talk about them in a minute, but if you think about a mortgage on my house, it's like a 25-year mortgage or something like that, and I will have ended up paying like about a third more of the house's value. So let's say the house is worth £200,000, which I wish it was. It would be, I'll end up paying like, 280 back for it. So I've paid 280 for a house which is worth 200, but that's just the way it is, isn't it? There's no other way of accessing finance like that. I don't have access to £200,000 or something like that. So that's the point. A lot of the time, it will depend on the situation whether you actually have the ability to use any other kind of finance to do it. Okay, so and usually used to purchase fixed assets, vehicles, equipment, property, that kind of stuff, and quick and relatively easy to arrange. It's harder now to do than it used to be, though. It is a lot harder to do than it used to be, because they've got to go through all these legal loopholes now. Now, let's have a look at leasing. Now, what is leasing? Well, leasing, when assets are leased from a leasing company. Okay, so firms get to use the asset whilst monthly payments are made, but the asset is never owned. So it's renting. Leasing is renting, essentially, but it's renting some kind of capital asset. As firms are using the assets from the start, it reduces the amount of startup capital needed, and commonly used for office equipment like computers and photocopies and things like that. There is no benefit to you a lot of the time of purchasing a product outright. Now, we might feel like it is a big benefit to us, but there are all the other things, the expenses that come with having that product. Like, I've bought a MacBook that I'm using now. I've got to deal with the depreciation of that MacBook. I've got to deal with the fact that one day it will probably stop working. If there is something wrong with it, then I'll have Apple Care for an amount of time and stuff like that, or whatever it's called. I'm not paying for extra things. And I have my statutory rights as a consumer in the UK. the Consumer Rights Act and things like that. Don't forget about that. Should do another video on that as well, as shouldn't I, about what your rights are and things like that. But it's important to remember that I am taking the responsibility. Once you purchase something, I'm taking full responsibility for this product. And I've not got someone to go to if there's anything wrong with it, as I said, other than, my rights and things like that. Whereas, excuse me, if you go with if you go to the leasing company, then there is the expectation that as you never own it, that they will cover some of the stuff. If there's anything wrong with it, you can take it back to the leasing company, can't you? And you don't have to go out. I wouldn't have to go out and say, right, well, there's, 1,500 quid for a MacBook. What I would do is I would say there's, £50 a month for the MacBook, and I'll borrow it from you for 6 months or whatever. So they make a nice little bit of money. They'll make the 250 quid, they'll make the 300 quid, whatever it is that we decide that we're going to get, and I get access to the asset. And things for like photocopies and things like that. Do you really want to it's getting a little bit better, my hair fever. Do you really want to be going and shelling out for masses of photocopies and computers? Is there really any need, or could you just get a company? If you think about things for like massive companies with loads and loads of computers, there's no benefit to them from that, and eventually they'll need to upgrade them as well. So doing something from a leasing company would be a much better idea. Okay, another one, hire purchase. Now, a lot of you will know hire purchase, or rather, you won't know it as hire purchase, but you will be experiencing hire purchase when you start to buy cars. Okay, so it's similar to leasing, but you have the benefit of owning the asset after the final repayment. So when you're deciding to buy a car, whether you've decided to do it yet or whether you've decided to do the leasing option, if you lease a car, you never own it. Okay, can be cheaper, can be more expensive. And what I find people do is they don't make savings on cars. Instead of, if they find that they can get it for a cheaper rate, they just buy a better car, a more expensive car. You see these teenagers, don't you, driving around in Audis and bloody, very expensive Mercedes and things like that. And you think, yeah, the likelihood is, mate, is you're going to write that car off very soon. Well done. And you hear about these people constantly. Why is insurance so expensive for young people? And it's because the likelihood is you're going to write the car off. You're probably going to have a crash. Statistically, I'm not saying that you're not a good driver or anything like that, but statistically, you're likely to do something stupid. Statistically, you're likely to have an accident. So it's not always the best idea to jump to, the most expensive version of the car. Oh yeah, I've driven a Mercedes at like 17 years old. Yeah, I don't expect that to be around for very long. And the insurance for that must be sky high. Some of the stuff that people pay is absolutely insane. Just be sensible, yeah. You don't have to jump to the end. You don't have to all have a 12-bedroom detached mansion all of a sudden. You don't all have to be driving around in most expensive Audis available. Just work towards it, yeah. But anyway, as we were talking about, so for hire purchase, so basically you put a deposit down. You make your monthly payments, but it's a bit like when we say hire purchase, you hire the car until you've purchased it, basically. So you're leasing the car, but essentially, with a lease, you never own it. With a hire purchase, you are hiring the car until you've paid enough off it that you own the car. Now, the next question for your car ownership is it worth it to you to actually purchase the car? What benefit to you is actually owning the car? Do you want to keep the car for an indeterminate amount of time? Or is it financially better for you to have some kind of deal where you give the car back after a certain amount of time? Potentially. It depends on the situation for you, doesn't it? But what I find with these things is a lot of the time we are used to doing hire purchase and things like that because it sounds like the more sensible option, but a lot of people don't actually want to own the vehicle at the end of that anyway. People like to change the vehicles quite often. Personally, I don't. I'm not that bothered about that. I'm not a massive car person. I'll run these cars into the ground, but it'll still be a while until I've paid them off as well. So once I've paid them off, maybe it'll be a bit different. But I'm just looking forward to not having to pay them that much. So at the end, you've got to decide whether you actually want the car, haven't you? Whether you decide that you want to do this kind of thing. And if you do need any advice on these, I've been through all the things. So if you ever do need advice on it, feel free to email me or leave me a comment. I'll happily talk you through what the most sensible thing to do. Mr. Businessman's massive tip on buying cars, though: do not get the finance from the car company because they will rip you off. There is never going to be the best kind of finance. You're never going to get the best loan from them. If you want to get a loan from a loan company. Zorpa, for example, very peer-to-peer lending. That are usually the cheapest that I've found on the market. Don't quote me on it because it's not a Mr. Businessman, quotable thing. But that's where I've got mine from. They were very, very cheap. Like it was something like 1.8% or something I was paying, very, very reasonable. Whereas if you get the finance from Arnold Clark or Evans Halshaw, wherever, bloody Mercedes-Benz Finance or whatever, because that's the trick, isn't it? With cars, the car companies like Evans Halshaw and people like that, they're not car companies. They're finance companies. They make their money off finance. The cars are just there for something expensive for you to buy. So keep that in mind. Don't get conned by them. If you want to buy a car, you want to go in with the cash ready to go. You're in the driver's seat. Don't let them con you into spending loads of money, because they might go, oh, it's only under the £13 a month, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, £13 a month. Well, that's at least what? Well, if it was over 12 months, you've got £130 for the 10 months, and then you've got the two, haven't you? So you're probably looking closer to 160 quid, something like that, 150, 160 quid more, just because they say it's £13 a month more. It starts racking up. See it for what it is. It's really easy to fall down this hole. Okay, an overdraft. So what is an overdraft? Well, an overdraft is when you spend more money than's in your account. Now, if you are younger than 18, you won't have access to one of these yet, but when you are over 18, if you use that, the bank will usually give you access to this. Now, there's two different types. There is arranged overdrafts and non-arranged overdrafts. Now, non-arranged overdrafts are the worst ones. That's when you've not arranged with the bank that you should have an overdraft, but essentially they've fronted you some money and they're going to expect a lot of interest on it. Interest charges have changed recently because they've, again, the government have started to put legislation in to make sure that these banks aren't going crazy or putting loads and loads of interest on stuff, but it is still very, very high. It's not a cheap way of doing things, overdraft. It's not sensible. So able to withdraw more money from the business bank account than the money that's in it. It's quick and easy to arrange with the bank, so it'll help short-term cash flow. A flexible agreement, so the business does not need to use any more than it needs. Interest and daily charges can be added. An application, short-term cash flow, emergencies only. Really important that you don't suggest in your exam that they use overdrafts for long-term stuff at all. I mean, avoid using overdrafts completely if you can, because the interest rate is very, very high. You personally, though, if you want to decide to use use your overdraft, that's okay. You know what I say. I will do another video actually on student finance and why that's it's unreasonable not to fleece the company, fleece the bank for all you can get from them in terms of student finance and things like that, because it's a completely different a different situation than a usual loan. But we won't go into that here. But yeah, I think it's with the overdraft thing, it's just a case of trying to avoid using it, even if you can if you arrange one with them, if you say, okay, can I have a £2,500 overdraft, always have, arrange something with them, because ultimately then if you do go into the black, or rather you go into the red, then you essentially will at least stop paying as much interest as you usually would have. And you don't want to get into a situation where you go into a shop and you've got no overdraft facility sorted, so you've run out of money in the account and they just decline the payment and you can't pay for stuff. That's not a good situation to be in either, is it? So short term allows you to get over some stuff, can be really good for seasonal companies and things like that, because if they know that they've got access to that, it's a really nice way of getting by. Now, debt factoring. Debt factoring is one that a lot of people get confused with. It's not a hard concept, but it's a weird concept when you've not heard of it before. So when a customer's debt is sold to a debt factoring company, they receive the money straight away, but usually only about 80 to 85% of the invoice owed. Avoids having to wait for customers to pay, allowing cash brought in to help pay for outgoings, thus helping short-term cash flow. So what is debt factoring? Right, let me just explain it in a really simple way. Debt factoring is where, let's say Jeff owes me £1,000, right? So I decide to lend Jeff £1,000, or I've let him buy £1,000 worth of stuff off me. So he owes me £1,000, right? I'm assuming at this point that Jeff, we've done our due diligence. He's a trustworthy person. I can trust that he is actually going to pay, because we do have bad debts and things like that. But in this case, we're going to say that I am trusting that he is actually going to pay me. Now, something happens, which means that I need the money back sooner than I said. Now, the problem with that is I can ask Jeff whether he's available to actually pay the money back, but he's under no legal obligation to do that, because the contract that we'll have signed into will have said that he had 6 months to do it. And if it's now month 3 and I need the money back, then I can ask, but there's no legal obligation for him to give me the money back, which puts me in a difficult position, doesn't it? So there are companies out there, and you can do this to other companies as well, but the main thing with these is debt factoring companies. Debt factoring companies will come and buy debt from you. So there will be a third party, let's say debt factoring for you. Debt factoring for you will come and buy the £1,000 debt off me. So they'll say, okay, we will give you 850 quid today for your £1,000. So now Jeff owes them the £1,000, not me. So I get my 850 quid off debts, whatever I call them, debt factoring for you. Jeff now owes debt factoring for you £1,000, and I get my 850. So in no way does it affect Jeff. He's not a problem for him, but for me, it means that I don't get access to everything, which, that's where they make their profit. Debt factoring for you get their profit from the extra 150 quid. And they're pretty confident that they're going to get the money back because we've done due diligence and stuff like that. Not to say that it couldn't be wrong, it could be, but, hopefully it isn't. And then for me, I get my little bit back just to help me with cash flow or whatever it is that I need the money back for. Because really, if you're in a position where you can wait out those extra 3 months, then wait for it, because you get your extra 150 quid. But in this case, debt factoring might be able to help you out of the situation. So it can be, it can only be used to recover debts of customers who have bought using trade credit, though. So it can't help any other ways. They've got to owe us money, essentially. So we've got to have sold them something that they need to pay for. Essentially, it's got to have a contract that can be moved over to a third party. Okay. Sale and leaseback. This is one that's not talked about loads in business, and it's one that's done a lot in business, but not really talked about in business lessons. And it's a nice little way of doing it. So if you've got a sale and leaseback, so it says the business sells the assets such as buildings or machinery to a finance company and then leases the assets back. So what if you said, right, I want to have access to money, I want to have access to cash to be able to do something to increase the way the business is running, or I want to do an expansion, or blah, 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 whatever it is you want to do, research and development or something, okay? And you say to the bank, can I have this money? And they say no, because of blah, blah, blah. Well, you might think, right, well, what do we actually have here? We have all these assets. We have loads of fixed assets. We have computers. We have all these things that we've bought. We have, vehicles, machinery, things like that. Why don't we sell them? More, as I said, more machinery and more vehicles and things like that, rather than computers, actually. But you see my point. Why don't we sell them to a company and then lease them back off them? So in real terms, it frees up some money for us, but it just changes it into a lease agreement. So it's better for everyone. It means that we've got more access to working capital, and the business is able to free up some cash like that. Can you see how it works? So it's pretty good, sale and lease back, if you can get a company to do it with you. So an asset owned by the company can then be turned into capital for reinvestment and stuff like that. Be careful of doing it too much, because remember, it increases your monthly outgoings. So it's not that you suddenly have access to loads more money. It's just that you've moved money around. You've changed money from a fixed asset into a non-fixed asset, essentially, or try to change it into liquid money. The business has use of the asset, which is a really nice thing. Reduces the value of the business can have on the balance sheet, though, because we're not going to have access to those assets. Remember, it will affect your ratios and ratio analysis of your business and things like that. And it can be a form of what we call rationalisation to improve efficiency. What is rationalisation? Rationalisation is where you close parts of the company or close parts of things, get rid of things that we're not using at the minute, more effectively, manage your cash flow and things like that. So the companies will be doing it all around the country at the minute, all around the world. Will be rationalising stuff, won't they? They will be looking at the way that the business is organised and saying, is there any more efficient way of doing this? Is there any way that we could free up some money, because we're going to fail otherwise? The government are saying that they're going to give all this money to people, but it's not coming through. The banks are being awkward with people because at the end of the day they are privately owned. It's a difficult situation we live in, isn't it? Okay, now we're nearly there, so stick with me because we are nearly there. We've got a couple more to do, but we're nearly there. Okay, so government assistance. We've got external government assistance. So external government assistance offering finance to entrepreneurs, usually in the form of a grant or tax relief. We've mentioned these a little bit the other day. Most of the time they don't have to be paid back. This can be, it'll depend on what the situation is. The government are currently giving coronavirus grants out to businesses, aren't they, of a certain amount, but it's not going to do you for very long. Most of the time they don't have to be paid back. Help is given to the government thinks most needs it. Hard to get is usually quite narrow qualifying criteria. I know at this moment in time we're living in crazy times and this has been changed, but usually it's hard to get grants. It will depend on what the government are trying to achieve at the time. If they're coming up with improving, they're saying, we want to do, we want to have more smartphones made in the UK, for example. Then they might give you a grant if you are a smartphone company to come to the UK, or a fledgling smartphone company in the UK. But it'll depend on what they're trying to achieve at that time. Relatively small amounts as well. They don't give out loads and loads and loads, and likely to be small businesses or businesses in the region of high unemployment. Whatever it is that we're trying to do, stimulate growth a little bit. If you say, I'm trying to help the local society get people off the street, drugs, crime, knives, whatever it is, then they're more likely to help you out with stuff like that. No guarantee though. Trade credit. Trade credit you use all the time. We don't call trade credit for individuals trade credit though. We just call it credit. When people say about credit, and I think credit is an interesting term because personal credit, personal debt, I think credit sounds better than debt, and a lot of that is psychological marketing, isn't it? Because we are just slightly changing it. Buy now, pay later, blah blah blah. Makes you think that you're getting something really good when in usual fact it's not as good as it seems. But in terms of businesses, we call it trade credit. So when goods are bought from a supplier on credit, we're able to receive the stock or raw materials now, but we pay for them at a later date. So it's kind of like, DFS and people like that, where they say buy now and receive before Christmas, or, pay us in 3 years or whatever it is. I'd be saying, well, why the hell are sofas so expensive that you're having to pay them over 3-year processes? It's insane, isn't it? Allows raw materials to be used before being paid. Therefore improving your cash flow. Limited to raw materials and stock. There isn't loads you can do with things like this. So it's not, in terms of trade credit, you're not going to get trade credit on things like vehicles or things like that. I mean, potentially you could kind of argue with them, but it's very unlikely. They're usually going to want you to, it's going to be too expensive to get trade credit on things like that. So you would have to look at the situation though. As I said, I don't want to tell you like, categorically you can't use it on that, but you definitely can't use it on things like, property and things like that. But yeah, look at the situation that you're talking about, okay? So if you just think about them in terms of raw materials and stock, it's a nice way to sort of differentiate in your mind of them. It takes time to build up a relationship with your supplier and get them to trust you, to be able to do this with them. And you may struggle to get credit if you're a new business. You will find this yourself, isn't it? It's important to get your credit score up and not default on any payments and things like that. I've known people who have defaulted on payments and have really struggled to get that back up on and running again. It's not something that I've ever personally had to deal with in terms of rebuilding a credit score, but I can see how flimsy they are and how bad, even little things like moving house and stuff like that can massively affect credit ratings and your ability to access finance. What about mortgages? Well, mortgages you might have heard of, but it's a large sum of money from the bank to purchase buildings, repaired over many years. Why do we call it a mortgage rather than a bank loan? Well, a mortgage is because it's attached to the property. So the idea is with a mortgage that the bank know that they're going to be able to get the money back. They won't lend you money way above and beyond the actual value of that property at that time. The idea that property will go up in price eventually as well. We hope that it will. And there has been times there's peaks and troughs of how much your property will be worth. But it's something that we hope that the the market for housing, that will increase and go better. So it says, whilst a very large sum is borrowed, it's repaid over a long period of time, the monthly payments are relatively low in comparison, thus allowing the affordable way to purchase such an expensive asset. Long-term borrowing, over the course of the mortgage, will pay significantly more. This is what I was saying, wasn't it? So you you pay £150,000 for a house, you're probably going to end up paying 230, 240 for it back. If you were to go through the whole 25 years, 30 years process or whatever it is. Remember, Mr. Businessman tip, do not mortgage yourself up to the eyeballs. It is so important that you don't forget about your cash flow. You've got your day-to-day outgoings that you've got to think of. Do you still want to be able to go to the cinema? Do you still want to go to restaurants? Do you still want to be able to buy that new Xbox game without worrying about it? Do you still want to go and buy a new handbag? Do you want to go out, whatever it is, and feel confident about it? Or do you want all your money tied up in your house? You might have a really, really lovely house, but you can't go anywhere because you've no money. Lots of people, value different things, but I think a lot of people get trapped by this. Share capital, we are nearly there. Stick with me. We have got share capital. Share capital is capital received from investors in returns for shares of the business. So what are shares? The shares, if you will, the shares of the business, aren't they? They are the value of the business in terms of the ownership of the business that's divvied up into sections and then sold off for an amount of money. And if it's a PLC, these are sold on the stock exchange. So that's what we're seeing at the top right, where we're seeing, and the prices will fluctuate quite significantly depending on what's happening in the world, whether the industry. That's what's happening with Netflix at the minute, when we said that they are more their market capitalization in terms of, if you add up all the value of the company in terms of the shares, actually brings them out to being worth more than Disney, which is insane because Disney's an absolute giant in its field. So to be able to take them on is absolutely crazy. I didn't think Netflix were that thingy, but that probably will come down again. The market capitalization will probably decrease again because everyone isn't going to stay in indefinitely and things like that, are they? So for a limited company, share capital is likely to be the most important source of finance. They can raise higher sums of capital. Remember, you can sell some shares in your business. Got to be careful that you don't sell too many, though, because if you sell too many, then someone might take over your business, things like that. Mainly for PLCs. Remember, for LTDs, in terms of our limited companies, private limited companies, it's very difficult to get share capital like this because all your shareholders have to agree to selling them. It's not an easy thing to do. Think about share capital really for your PLCs. That's more applicable. Not repaid directly, but they will want dividends, and you're giving up a bit of your company at the end of the day, aren't you? Be careful of doing it. Someone could sweep in, a big competitor could come in and buy a load of your company. The business must go through incorporation and become a limited company. Remember, need to find and willing investors who wish to buy shares. Not often used at startup because you need to justify the thing, and more people won't necessarily want to buy in. More commonly used to fund growth and established business. So again, you can use it for public limited and private limited, but remember it's significantly more difficult to do the private limited one because of the nature of how private limited companies are organised. For public limited companies, this is what they do all the time, and they might release a load of shares if they want to raise some money to do something with. And then venture capital. We've not talked about venture capital, but it's these people at the top right, Dragon's Den. These are your venture capitalists. Now, venture capitalists are slightly different than the dragons because the dragons are what we call business angels. And business angels are not only people who want to put money into the business, but they'll help you with the business as well. Venture capitalists won't help you with the business. They are just investors who want to invest in businesses. So an outside investor who provides capital for a business can inject quite high sums, will often provide advice and support. Usually want a share of the business, can cause conflict if they have different views and objectives, often used for riskier business. So venture capitalists, as we said, they're not going to never speak to you again, but if you terms of someone who wants to, if you want the advice and support more than this, if you need that part of it, then you better go in with what we call a business angel, which is what the dragons are, rather than classic venture capitalists, because classic venture capitalists are people who just provide money. And they might not even know anything about your industry. They just see an opportunity and invest in things like that. Whereas the dragons are people who will help you as well. So they're what, again, we will call them business angels rather than this. We are up to the end. Okay, so let's just finish off this last little bit. So 3 reasons why a government would want to help an entrepreneur. Remember, think about your stakeholders. Okay, what does governments want? Well, governments want. They want tax and they want employment for the people, don't they? So They create jobs, therefore reducing unemployment. They develop new products and ideas which give consumers choice and develop the economy, which is really good. Remember, we don't want to have less choice. And the increased GDP. Now, we haven't talked about GDP that much, but it's gross domestic product. It is the amount, essentially, per person in the country that we are making. So we take the full output in terms of what the country is producing in terms of it's almost like the market capitalization of the country, but we look at the full amount of sort of revenue for the country, and then we divvy it up by person, and we call that GDP. Why might a new business find it harder to get a bank loan than an established business? Because new businesses can be seen as more risky, so people will be less likely to want to invest in them and things like that, and banks won't want to give them the money, will they? So that, ladies and gents, is bringing us to the end of that. And I know, and I did warn you that there's going to be a hell of a lot of of information coming through in that one, and it is a sort of a one where we just need to talk through it essentially. So we've come to the point of the stream when we like to have a look at the news. So welcome if you've just joined us. You're just in time for the news. Let's have a little look at it. So here we are now. Let's just have a quick refresh, just check we're bang on time now. Oh wow, 2 minutes ago. Let's have a look at this one. Norman Hunter, Leeds United legend, dies after contracting coronavirus. It says Leeds United great Norman Hunter has died in hospital at 76 after contracting coronavirus. The tough tackling centre-back named Bites Your Legs was a key player in Leeds' most successful era. He won 2 league titles during a 14-year first-team career at Elam Road, and was a non-playing member of the England team in 1966 World Cup squad. He has 2 league titles. Wow, what a shame. As I said, I don't follow football, don't know who the guy is, but it's never a nice thing, is it? It's never a particularly thing like this. It's not a nice thing to think. This is an interesting one as well. So it says, I need gowns, can I call Burberry? NHS Trust boss asks. So the director of a large NHS Trust has contacted the BBC asking for the phone number of Burberry and Barber because he does not have enough gowns for his staff working on coronavirus wards. He said that he's had less than 24 hours supply with the weekend coming up. He has hugely concerned. The trust is in the south of England, but the BBC is not naming it. The Department for Health said it's working around the clock. They keep saying this, around the clock, we're working around the clock. For a number of weeks, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the government ministers have said that during press briefings that the interviews that Burberry will begin making personal protective equipment on behalf of the government as one of the answers to the critical storage. Burberry said at the end of March that it would repurpose its trench coat factory in Castleford, West Yorkshire, to make non-surgical gowns and masks for hospital patients. The government has been criticised for not providing enough PPE for the NHS and other care workers to provide them. Now, the difficulty is here, guys, and we know we talked about this a little bit, and I know that we're all freaking out about this, but let's have a look at it. I don't mean to be too critical of what it is, but it's complete lack of planning, this, doesn't it? I mean, it completely shows the lack of funding for the NHS, and they should hold the head in shame. This is what happens if you completely underfund your National Health Service. So I don't mean to kick them when they're down. I don't mean to be completely, unreasonable about the situation, but it's not fair. You've got people on the bloody doorsteps every Thursday clapping people, and yet they're not providing people with the necessary personal protective equipment that they would need to be able to not get the virus themselves. People are dying. This is a big thing, isn't it? And it shows a failure of the government to actually get ready for things. And this is what I can't believe it. We've got this guy, haven't we? That Captain Tom guy who's 99 or something, who's been walking up and down a garden, and he's raised loads of money. Fair play to the guy. It's really good that someone's doing something like that. I don't know if he's much of a national hero as everyone's making him out to be, as I said, but I'm dead cynical about stuff like this. I've no problem with the guy. He seems great, but I don't know why it's national news that. I think it's probably because we've nothing else to talk about at the minute, isn't it? But fair play to the guy. But he's like, oh yeah, I've raised 15 million or whatever for the NHS. Well, why should you have to, mate? You shouldn't, should you? So it's not fair that some guy should have to do that. It's great that he's done it. Fair play. I'll take my hat off to the guy, especially at that age. But you know what? He shouldn't have to. We should be. I pay enough tax. We're a very high tax paying country, and we shouldn't have to be asking 99-year-olds to be walking up and down places trying to raise money for a service which we all pay into. It's like saying, oh yeah, well, we've raised loads of money so we can have more police. But yeah, raise the money from tax. That's what I pay into. So it's annoying me more and more that we're getting like sidetracked into thinking that this is a really positive thing at the minute, where it doesn't really seem like that to me. You think it's a crazy one. So, payday and car loan repayments freeze. Let's have a look at this one. It says, people struggling with payday loans, car finance or pawn shop borrowing will be granted a payment holiday. The Financial Conduct Authority said the measures would help borrowers who are experiencing money problems amid the COVID-19 outbreak. The FCA warns motor finance firms to grant a 3-month freeze. It will also be asking firms to specialise in rent-to-own, buy now, pay later and pawn-breaking loans to delay payments. Interesting one. Again, it's about cash flow. It's about, temporary financial difficulties. The issue with doing this will be, what about those companies? What about the companies themselves? That's like saying you trade credit, essentially. Here, you've just said that the FCA have come in and said, actually, that trade credit that you gave them for 6 months, well, actually, they've got 9 months to pay it now. That's difficult, isn't it? Royals say lockdown is stressful on mental health. Oh, I'm really sorry for you. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge say it's important to people to know where they can find support. How have these people become famous? I know that I say that, how have they become famous? I know how they've become famous. The royalty, aren't they? Or at least that chap is. But they're not charismatic, are they? Goodness me, this is the problem with royalty, isn't it? We should have at least, Boris Johnson. Love him or loathe him, he's a bit more entertaining than these guys. Like, oh yeah, well they're all Brit. They're what make Britishness. He's on it today, isn't he, Mr. Businessman, having a go at veterans who are 99 who are doing loads of really good things, and now he's having a pop at the royalty. I'm not. I hope this comes across in context. I'm not having a pop at them. I'm just saying that. I'm never impressed by it. The Queen's good, isn't she? She sort of does her stuff. She's nice. But I just don't get it. It's not for me. Let's have a quick look at this one. What they say there? Yeah, clap for carers. Oh, there we go. People who Pete says. What did it say then? The business is a limited company, and the duo are the company directors who pay themselves in dividends, like hundreds of thousands of people running their business in the same way. They will get little or no state support. This is a problem, and this is about companies that are doing what is reasonable, they're playing by the rules. We talked about this, didn't they? That businesses are being punished for playing by the rules, like paying your tax on time and stuff like that. They both look really happy, don't they? Look at them. We can furlough ourselves for the small business salaries we take, but that will only leave us with £600 a month, which doesn't cover my outgoings. By furloughing themselves, they would be allowed to work on anything that wouldn't be allowed to work on anything that brings in money for the business. Only organisational work as a director. It means we won't be able to work at a time when the business is on the brink. There is a real prospect that he might have to shut up shop and lay off his staff. This is an issue, isn't it? This is the way it is. Interesting, though, that he chooses to do that. And why does he choose to do that? Well, he chooses to do it because it would give him less tax of doing it like that. So I'm not trying to have a jab at the guy. It's a completely legit way of doing it, but this is one of the issues, isn't it? If he'd have decided to go to pay through himself as a salary instead, he wouldn't be in this situation. It's okay for me to say that, isn't it? It's crazy. But, Okay, let's just have a look at one last thing now. We talked about PLCs being careful to not thingy too much, don't we? Provide too much. To put too many shares out because potentially it could get taken over. So let's have a look. It says the EU plans to help block foreign takeovers of European countries struggling with the virus downturn. It warns it wants to allow governments to invest in weak companies, which could include some form of ownership. Whilst it's called them measured for a last resort, the European Commission says it's consulting member states. A focus for the regulators to counter unfair competition from state-owned firms, which is the backbone of our economy, such as China. It is now looking at further protection for businesses based in the EU in light of the significant financial impact coronavirus lockdowns are having on them. This is the principle falls outside the scope of the EU state AIDS control, and can in particular be important for the inventions by member states to prevent hostile takeovers of strategic companies by foreign purchasers. This is a good point. Perfect time to go and invest in companies, isn't it? Perfect time to go and poach some companies now and go and do it, because is a big one. Is this for us? No. Never mind. Okay, let's call it there, ladies and gents. So thank you very much for joining me for week 4. Wow, week 4 of Mr. Businessman complete. We have done so much. We are doing absolutely brilliant stuff. I hope it's been useful to you. Thank you very much for joining me once again. And remember, video back here every day. We usually do funny stuff over the weekend, so I'll be putting some stuff up over the weekend. But watch back today. As I missed the midweek madness, I will be doing Mr. Businessman's end of week insanity. So I will be releasing two videos today, which is insane, because it's just not sensible. It's just not sensible. But you know what? This is insanity. So I will see you on Monday, 10 o'clock. See you then. Peace.